Okay, so thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to today's webinar, Why Next Gen Customer Experiences Will Be MACH Powered. We'll be introducing the panel in a moment. The purpose of today is to really help you get under the skin of MACH, what is MACH, and how it will actually help drive customer experience in the future. So you'll hear from our expert panel. We'll do a deeper dive on MACH, and then we'll talk about actually how to go about adopting MACH into your organizations. A couple of housekeeping things. Please, we are actually encouraging as much interaction as we can on the webinar today. Our colleague Gordon will be hosting the chat area. He'll be encouraging you to have conversations, to put your questions into the chat and into the Q&A tab. And we'll be taking questions as we go along with each speaker, but we'll also hopefully have a good chunk of time at the end for questions. So Gordon will be running a sideshow. He'll be competing with the main speakers. So we'll hope to keep our speakers keeping you interested. So all of the action isn't happening in chat, but please do use that and please do interact. So first and foremost, we'll introduce ourselves. So I'm today's host. I'm Natalie Gross. I'm VP of Brand and Marketing at EPAM for EMEA. EPAM is a global product engineering company. I'll be touching on what is MACH, what is the MACH Alliance, and sort of helping drive the discussion amongst colleagues. My background is running marketing and technology agencies for the last 20 years, and I've worked with clients across all sectors, so really understand, I guess, the challenges, opportunities and perils of how technology has supported business and business transformation, retail and commerce over the last 2 decades. So delighted to see where we are and to hear from the panel in terms of, I suppose, the precipice we stand on and where we're going over the next few years in terms of how technology will support our customer experiences. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Sonia to spend a minute or two talking about herself and introducing herself.
Thank you, Nat, and thank you everybody for joining. My name is Sonia Carroll. I'm the Global Head of Product Marketing at Contentstack, and I'm also the Vice President of the MACH Alliance. Nat asked me to spend 5 minutes to talk about what the future of customer experience looks like and how marketing technology is shifting to accommodate that. Spice a little bit of analysts' commentary in that. My background is that I've been helping enterprise organizations globally to, speed up their evolution on the digital experience side. I have a strong focus on content management in that, and I look forward to discussing that further with you.
Thanks, Sonia. And jumping over to Kelly.
Hi, I am CPO of Commerce Tools, and I am president of the MACH Alliance. So I come from a long history of doing commerce implementations, from that old world doing ATG, and then microservices and cloud at Oracle. And now I'm coming up on 5 years at Commerce Tools, and I'll be covering what MACH is, a little bit more on the technology side, also misconceptions, benefits, and how you sell it into an organization.
Thanks, Kelly. And the last of our today's speakers, over to Matt.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so I'm Matt. I'm the MACH business leader at EPAM in EMEA. My background is I started out client side in the .com boom with buy.com and went on to run quite a few e-commerce and digital businesses, mostly in the UK. So people like Barclays Bank Online and Waterstones.com. I'm going to be talking about looking at sort of approaches that you can take to implementing a MACH technology from a client point of view, some of the things to look out for, and then looking at how you can build out your business case. That's pretty much a whistle-stop tour of all of that.
Fabulous.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, so before we get into the individual speaker sections and into the detail, just thought we'd spend a couple of minutes talking about what is MACH. We could probably be forgiven for thinking that MACH is a term that has been sort of in our vocabulary as people working in marketing and technology for a long time, but actually it's a relatively new term, certainly for a lot of us in the industry. And whilst it's an acronym, and we'll talk about that in a second, fundamentally it stands for, it's a form of modern architecture. And whilst a lot of these technologies have probably been sort of coming to the fore over the last 10 years, it's only really now that we're starting to see critical mass, I suppose, in terms of actually the way that we can think about our technologies and the technology choices that we have available to us to actually build out our businesses. We talk about digital transformation, but really business transformation. And so there is a pretty fundamental shift in terms of architecture. And a lot of that is driven by MACH technologies. And I'll touch on the individual acronyms, and Kelly will go into that in a lot more detail than I would be able to. But a couple of things in this statement I think is really key. The first is around MACH technologies support a composable enterprise or a composable architecture using components. And I think a lot of us, and I know we have a lot of people that span marketing and product as well as technologists on the call today. So a lot of us are used to having technology systems that deliver our web, our commerce experiences, our social experiences, that is largely about buying a single piece of technology or primary piece of technology, and actually then thinking about how do we configure and in some instances customize to build on top of or around the technologies that we've procured. And certainly with MACH, what we find is that instead of buying one piece of technology, we can buy multiple pieces of technology that work together. And so this word composable is a really nice sort of evocative word, because it's actually about composing and therefore having control of the technologies that we want to buy at a composable or a more micro level that we can build together to deliver the customer experience we want, which the team will go into in more detail. But I think that's one fundamental change, is the control that we can have over our technology choices, which indeed helps us to have control over the customer experiences we develop. And the second one really is about continuously improve, because one of the things that I'm sure if people have been working in the industry for a number of years will know that sometimes it's about getting live and then waiting for the evolution, for the improvement to come. And actually a big part of what MACH is about continuous improvement, because of the agile development methodologies and the technologies that we're using to deploy. So microservices, think of it as small business applications. So for example, rather than a big platform for, say, if you're a hotel, you can think about your business in terms of a room booking, a restaurant booking, a leisure services booking, etc., etc. And individual parts of the business can actually start to control their services. And that's really around microservices, API first, a way to actually deliver out technology, functionality and content from your business into other businesses. And the biggest ones that you tend to see are around things like Skyscanner, Booking.com, a lot of those intermediary sites around things like Facebook for login, Apple Pay for payment, etc., etc. So it's about exposing your functionality through APIs that can be utilized by other services. Cloud native, really about cloud native SaaS, I should say. I'll be getting frowns from the panel, but really about taking advantage of the flexibility, agility, scale of how you develop and actually deliver your digital services through cloud platforms. Taking advantage of that really then is about controlling cost, controlling experience, being able to flex up and down, and being able to do so at speed. And then headless, divorcing the front end of your platform from your back end. And really what that will mean for a lot of us from a marketing and product background is that we have greater control and ability to change at the front end without having to go through big software development and test and regression life cycles, etc., before we can get what we would deem to be maybe a small change live. So divorcing that front and back end to basically for marketing, product, commerce owners, liberating your customer experience. So that's just introducing MACH from a marketeer's perspective. And then just to touch on MACH Alliance. So the MACH Alliance formed in June last year, and really with the mission of helping businesses speed up, change customer experience, and to liberate customer experience based on a technology set that would enable that. So there's some people would call it a movement, very much Matt would, and some would basically call the alliance just a coming together of what would be, I guess, competitors, but people who believe in this technology and believe in the power of the alliance, the power of one voice to be able to help change in the market. And you'll see from some of the quotes and some of what Sonia will deliver is we've seen some real progress and real momentum around MACH, and we think the alliance, with now 27 members and 12 individual ambassadors, has played a part in that to build a voice for what new technology can do and achieve for business moving forward. And certainly the analysts, and we've seen some great reports, one of which will be available to all of you that are watching live today, just out, that really nods to and points to the power of MACH, and also the alliance as a conduit and as a voice for bringing education and bringing inspiration to the market. So I'll stop there, hand over to Sonia, who will now start to look at, as she said, the future of customer experience in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Nat. So the MACH Alliance was really born out of the mission to help you as practitioners to create that future customer experience. What that future customer experience and the future of customer experience looks like really depends very much on the specific industry, the specific use cases that you need to address for your customers. But there's a few attributes that any amazing customer experience in the future will need to meet. So let's look at those in a more abstract way. It needs to be digital first. Now you might say, duh, did I really come to this webinar to hear that again? And yes, every blog post, every webinar is talking about the future of customer experience is digital first. So let's take that as a given, but let's also look at the reality that in 2019, so just before the pandemic hit us, according to Forrester, 85% of executives went to sleep at night with the view that digital was a nice to have. Now, that's a lot. And 2020 was a pretty tough wake-up call for these 85%. But the reason why that is important when we think about the future of customer experience is that the future of customer experience in your organization is not primarily about technology, and Kelly is going to hate me for saying that, but it's primarily about how do you approach customer experience on your business, on your marketing, and yes, also on your IT side. But if in 2019 your executives kind of thought it was nice to have, that may mean that we need to change the mindset of these executives to get buy-in for what you need to do in the coming few months and in the coming year to create a future customer experience. So digital first, we know that. Digital first means ultimately that it needs to be omni-channel, that it needs to be driven by the customer journey, outside in thinking. Let's not think about your mobile team and your web team and your enablement team, your services team. Let's think about the different customers, their personas, their journeys, and what it is they're trying to achieve when they interact with your brand and with your organization. Also something that's not new, also something that we've been talking about in thought leadership and analyst conferences for, probably a decade. But something that was really, really hard to do without having MACH technology. Secondly, or thirdly, actually, it needs to be continuously evolving. Your customer experience projects no longer are projects, they're programs, or better yet, you really need to think about them as a product and product managing your customer experience. So continuously evolving could mean you evolve once a year, which would be suboptimal. These experiences need to evolve fast. You need to be able to get the learnings from the interaction that your customers have with you in a journey view, so across all of these channels, And you need to be able to respond to the needs that you then identify and the opportunities that you identify from your business side fast. And fast is a word that I really don't like, because to me, it always feels like when I go to the shop and I buy laundry detergent, they also tell me it's going to smell nicer and make my laundry cleaner than last year. And fast is a little bit like that. So what is actually fast when iterating over your customer experience? So I want to give you a few examples of enterprise organizations that have shifted from old world software to MACH technology and what fast means to them. There's one of the top 3 personal computing brands. They just went live with a mobile experience, a mobile and web actually, to engage with parents and teachers, with principals for kids that need to be homeschooled and really parents that don't know how to keep them busy anymore. This went out to 6 million consumers in 60 countries, hugely successful in 54 days. That's how long it took from signing the license agreement with the software vendor to launching it to 6 million customers. They told us it would probably have taken 6 months if they had not followed a MACH approach. A large financial services organization had the challenge that they had set up their big annual conference with all their customers and partners, and literally 2 weeks before the world went into lockdown. What they've done is, in an amazing 42 days, they shifted this entire conference from in-person to virtual. Those 42 days was someone probably still at the coffee machine at that time saying, maybe we should virtualize this, to the conference starting. This included recording all the speeches, setting up everything from the ticketing to the interaction. Usually that is something they told us would have taken them 8 months to prepare end to end. And lastly, one of the top global toy companies of fantastic building blocks, they actually, during the pandemic, shifted a B2B educational business unit that they had that would typically only sell to schools, really high-end, high-priced, shifted that direct to consumer. This is, again, to help the parents, and you can probably tell I am one by all of these examples, that were stuck at home with their children to enable them to make their day easier and still provide a fantastic homeschooling experience with toys they know and love. Shifting a B2B business unit direct to consumer takes, a year. I'm being optimistic here, probably years. They've managed to do that in weeks. Now, this is clearly a very agile organization because there's a lot of business processes that need to change. But what is crucial is that they could spot an opportunity, and technology did not hold them back. Technology enabled them to completely shift their entire B2B commerce, B2B content marketing into direct to consumer in a matter of weeks. So that's fast. And if you listen to Gartner and Forrester analysts the same, they clearly identified the need for adopting a composable approach to your digital experience stack, not suite, as a key driver for achieving this speed. The strategic planning assumption that you'll see across a lot of Gartner research is that by 23, organizations that adopted this approach will outpace their competition by 80% in the speed of new feature implementation, right? The ones who don't are going to become laggards by definition. And if we acknowledge that, yes, we are in a digital first world, yes, our customers do need to be addressed with amazing differentiating digital experiences, no matter what channel, no matter what time in their journey they engage, can anybody afford to be slow and be a laggard? I think not. So what does it mean for marketing technology? It needs to facilitate 3 key elements of making you, if you are on the business side and the marketing side, successful. The first one is experimentation. You need to be able to, at this speed, deploy constant change. You need to be able to get the insights back. Now, the old world of web content management that I come from could, to a certain extent, do this on the web, but the world isn't web. You never ever should be put in a situation where you want to change as a business practitioner something on your mobile app or on the store display at the other end of the world, and you cannot facilitate that same level of experimentation there because you have to call some IT guy somewhere to update some code. Experimentation across this entire omni-channel environment. Now, secondly, customer experience democratization. Now, what do I mean by that? If you want to enable your customers the way we just discussed, you need a lot more content, you need a lot more functionality, and you need to create a lot more, features on the IT side to do that. And what that means is you cannot have a single, a core digital experience team anymore, because they won't be able to stem this unless you can scale them infinitely, of course. So we see that a lot of organizations start to empower line of business users. So if you are, say, in insurance, then the experts that sit in pet insurance and home insurance and motor insurance, rather than having them send Word documents to a content management team, they are actually empowered to directly in the marketing technology make suggestions and changes. That demands for marketing technology to be as simple as consumer technology, because you don't need the overhead of training all these people. They need to be able to go in there, do what they do best without having any overhead that slows them down, really. Now, if you do that, though, you need to have cross-functional agile processes. So no workflows that bog you down and again, take away that speed that you need, but collaboration between the line of business, between your central marketing and content teams, but also with IT, so that when they want to create new functionality and you need to create, say, new product descriptions or new content descriptions for it, you can work sort of together apart and make sure that the actual deployment is happening in unison. That, by definition, requires that the underlying ecosystem, and let's not kid ourselves, it needs to be an ecosystem. There is no single vendor you can go to that will give you all the tools, best in class, that you need to deliver this future customer experience. They need to be resilient, because they need to be always there. They need to be flexible to accommodate this level of experimentation, and they need to be composable. They need to play nice with all the other tools that you have in there. Always on, always connected. And you know what? The last thing you need as a business is infrastructure maintenance. On premise, somewhere in the basement, there's servers that are running. It needs to be cloud, and you cannot afford to lose time on upgrading your core digital experience software. In fact, a MACH Alliance research that we just launched a few weeks ago found that on average, enterprise organizations with legacy technology spend 38.5% of their IT time on upgrading. That time is lost to innovate over the customer experience. So a brand new, just off the press analyst report by Forrester talks to very concretely how you as an organization need to move to a technology stack that'll enable you to do that. And here's a quote that I love: "Forget about build versus buy. Your choice is customize or compose." You'll be able to get this report, as Nat said, after the webinar. What is crucial is that, focusing on e-commerce here, the analyst says that the packaged suite approach to enterprise e-commerce has all but died out and been replaced by microservices from multiple vendors stitched together into solutions on whatever runtime proves most flexible to you, the enterprise. Why is e-commerce ahead of that? because in e-commerce, it is really a high value problem. You have a direct line to measure the removed friction to online revenue, to basket sizes, repurchase. And that is why retail is always a little ahead of the curve in adopting these new ways. If you are in another industry, the main claim, forget build versus buy, the suite approach has died, is still true. But you may need a little more help with the actual value chain and the value creation part, which Matt, I think, is going to address afterwards. And what that technology needs to look like, Kelly will tell you right after.
Thank you, Sonia. I have a couple of questions which I'm going to pose and then maybe answer them at the end, because I think one of the things that really stands out from what you just said is the eye-watering speed that the three examples that you gave actually got to market. And you know, in a lot of cases, projects will take that amount of time. In the shortest one, like 54 days, it can take that amount of time to actually ramp up, find the stakeholders, address the requirements, never mind be live. So I think one of the things I'd be really keen for you and maybe the panel to talk about afterwards is what are the shared characteristics of those type of organizations that enable such movement from I have a business idea or a business goal to live in remarkably fast timescales. So if we can sort of have that question ready to answer as we get to Q&A later on, that would be fantastic. And also, you know, what's wrong with being told your clothes are going to smell cleaner? You can answer that one later as well. I'm going to hand over to Kelly now.
Hey. All right. In this little section, I'm going to go through what MACH is a little bit more from a technology standpoint. There we go. All right. So as Nat mentioned before, it stands for microservices, APIs, cloud native, multi-tenant SaaS, and headless. And let's do a quick little deep dive on each one of these four. So with the first, microservices are small little applications that do one thing and one thing really well. So the analogy here is a cake. If you're baking a big sheet cake and you screw it up, you have to bake the entire cake again. And you have to serve the entire cake at once. Microservices are much more like cupcakes. You can eat them individually, you can decorate them individually, and you can eat them individually, thankfully. So with microservices, think of them as small little applications that do one thing and one thing really well. So with a microservices approach, you might get 7 people together. You might have some front-end developers who do APIs. You might have some application developers. You might have some infrastructure folks, and you get them together. It's typically 7 plus or minus 2. And they build and deploy and manage a single business function. So they might be responsible for inventory. And then anybody across an entire organization who wants inventory will call into that microservice. And what's important is that that microservice, that team, be fully encapsulated, not have dependencies in other teams, and they should be able to release to production whenever they want. And that's what has given Amazon such a competitive advantage. They've adopted a microservices first architecture. Also, Walmart has done this, Target has done this. At a certain scale, this is really the standard approach out there for enterprise commerce. And it works so well because you've reduced your the barriers between teams. So traditionally within large organizations, you would have a database team and you would have an infrastructure team and you'd have a development team. And anytime anything needed to get done, you would have to ticket another team. So if I, as a Java developer, needed a database column added to the database, I would have to go file a formal ticket with the database team, and they had their own workflow. And it was a lot of back and forth for what is a very, very simple change. With microservices, the advantage here is you have very high throughput, low latency communication between team members. So you want a team of 7 plus or minus 2 to sit together, to go to lunch together, to know each other's kids' birthdays. And in this model, there's a lot of trust there. So the developer can just go over to the database administrator and say, hey, can you add that column for me? And it dramatically accelerates development. And as Sonia mentioned, it's all about speed today. That's really the currency out there. Next is API first. So in this approach, you're building APIs and you're only exposing APIs. And the platform should not have a front end and a preference on what that front end should be, because we don't know what the future will hold with regard to front end experiences. And as you can see here in some of these screenshots, the front end could be Instagram, it could be a mobile app, it could be a point of sale system, it could be a voice interface, it could be one of those dash buttons that you put on a dishwasher or laundry machine, and you press a button when you need more detergent, for example. So it could be just about anything. And as a platform, we shouldn't be in the business of dictating what the experiences are for our customers. The next is cloud native multi-tenant SaaS. We firmly believe that we're going to be in a SaaS only world going forward. Legacy on-prem is very, very rapidly dying off. And just about everything now going forward is SaaS only. SaaS makes so much sense for everyone. And a benefit of SaaS is scalability. So if you look at folks like Selena Gomez, she has 120 million followers on Instagram. If she posts a link to one of your products and you're not auto-scaling, you're not multi-tenant SaaS, you're going to have a very, very serious problem with that. Historically, and even today in many cases, organizations like retailers, they have to contact their vendor and they have to say to their vendor, hey, I have a sale coming up. I would like a bunch of capacity added. So please double my production environment for the next week. And as you can see on the right, this is production traffic from Kohl's.com. Email campaigns spike traffic, holidays spike traffic. It's all auto scaling. So that's what's beneficial about multi-tenant cloud native SaaS is you can very quickly scale up and down, and it's up to the vendor to manage that. And it's not up to the retailer, the brand, or whoever's actually providing that service. And then finally, we have headless, and that's the ability to decouple the front end from the back end. So in this model, it's something we invented at Commerce Tools back in 2013. You can have front end teams iterating completely independently of back end teams. So they're completely separate. And the advantage of that is you can have 3 or 4 or 5 different front end teams, each innovating and releasing in parallel. And then you can have multiple back end teams, microservices exposing APIs. So you can have all of these teams all iterating in parallel together without any conflict. And that's really powerful from a speed perspective. I'm a very firm believer that innovation requires iteration, and you get that with a MACH-based approach. And the advantage of headless is that besides speed, it allows your marketers to have one-to-one emotionally engaging experiences with customers. If you look on the left, that's how more commodity stores, standard retail sells handbags. And in that model, it's simply a race to the bottom, right? You're selling commoditized handbags. There's no engaging with the customers. There's no experience. There's no anything there. And if you look on the right, this is what one of our customers does. They allow their marketers to control that experience. Because if you're going to sell a handbag for $1,000 or $2,000 or however much it is, the customers have to have an emotionally engaging experience with that brand. People want a Burberry branded handbag because they're amazing handbags. And the way you get that across is through the story. It's through meeting the artisans. It's by looking inside the factories and how they're made. It's all of those things. And that is primarily a marketing function. It's not an IT function. And headless allows for that separation between those two. And let's do a couple misconceptions, and then we'll go back to Nat. So the first misconception is that you can just straight up adopt MACH, and I think that is a big misconception. We are not just another technology vendor. MACH is an entirely new approach, and that requires changing how you function internally. And it requires switching from big horizontal teams that focus on technology to small vertical teams that focus on business capabilities. So it does require some change internally, but these changes are very much for the better. The next is that best of breed is more complex. With modern multi-tenant SaaS, I think it's actually easier because you're basically building what you want using Lego blocks. You're not forced to use an entire platform off the shelf as is. And look, that might be fine if you're a mom and pop shop doing a few $1 million a year online. Maybe you want a more paint by numbers solution, but anybody at the enterprise level needs to differentiate through technology. And the way they do that is by innovating and building some custom code and building custom experiences. So I don't think it's more complicated. That being said, you do have to be an enterprise or enterprise adjacent to adopt the approach. And then finally, I don't think you need terribly specialized developers to do MACH. I think you need folks who can work with microservices and APIs and cloud and headless. And that's a pretty wide pool of developers. Everyone who's getting certified from AWS or GCP or Azure is a good developer for this. You don't need proprietary developers who know some weird esoteric extension model. So it's a very different approach, but the MACH-based approach is much more standard in terms of the developers you need. You just get developers who work with APIs and cloud, basically. So with that, I will turn it back to Nat and we'll continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I guess a couple of things, or question for you to think about as we move towards the end. I listened to that and I think, wow, must have this for my organization. How do you get organizations on board? Because obviously this is a different approach. And whilst it all sounds really, really interesting and beneficial, are there barriers to adoption, and how do you get organizations on board if you're sitting here today and you're like, right, I really want to move? I think the other thing to the audience as well that I think is really important is getting a level of understanding and comfort in yourself about what you understand about MACH. And I think that's because if you understand from a marketing and product perspective the capability of MACH, then you can really truly do the experimentation and the innovation that Kelly and Sonia talked about earlier. And I think that that's really important. It's like, we need to know so much, but to enable us to do our jobs better as marketing and product people. And I think that that's really key. And hopefully you're getting some of this from today's webinar, and you'll continue to explore the MACH concept further. So I'll leave that question with you, Kelly, and then I'm going to hand over to Matt. Well, Matt's going to grab the screen and he's going to bring us home talking about really how do we actually then move to MACH? We're engaged, we're interested. How do we actually go about moving?
Right. So I'll respond first and then turn it over to Matt.
Go for it.
So generally you have to start small, right? I wouldn't completely blow up your existing IT organization. Instead, I would carve out a small team, build one microservice, expose that microservice through an API, and maybe build a web interface for that. So maybe start with pricing, or start with inventory, or carve out some small business function and pilot that and demonstrate, use that to show the rest of your organization truly how much better and faster MACH is over the standard. And then do another microservice and another, and pretty soon people will be flocking to this new approach internally because it is a lot better and it is easy to see the business benefit.
That's great. Thanks, Kelly. Matt.
Hey, all good. Can you hear me?
Got you.
Excellent. All right, let's see if this works and I'm in control. So this is going to be an exercise in how to distill what would be normally a couple of meetings with clients and prospects and maybe a couple of workshops into a single slide that builds gradually. And what we're going to be looking at is how you'd think about moving to a MACH setup, some of the things that you need to consider in terms of maybe the risks and some of the considerations in terms of how you're organizing yourself as a business. And then finally, some of the components that you bring in to the business case as you go forward. The interesting thing about MACH as an approach is that it's quite flexible. So where I'm spelling some of these things out, and I'm going to try and get this to work. Yeah, there you go. on the how. It can be a mixture of all these different things, and it really depends on the questions that you're trying to answer and the direction you're trying to go in. So let's look at the how. So the beautiful thing about Mac is that you're moving away from, I guess, using the Lego analogy, moving away from a Duplo setup of massive blocks, and you're getting much more, I guess, detailed with the Lego style size of things. So you can't build a Millennium Falcon out of Duplo, but you can out of Lego. So in terms of that, you're thinking about how you're approaching your current stack and how you're going to get to where you want to go. So one of the ways that you can approach this is by chipping away at what you currently have got. So one by one, microservice by microservice, or product by product, chip away and replace with a Mac solution that fits into that. So that's one approach. You could mix it up. You could say, okay, well, I've got this core product and architecture that I want to work with. I've sunk quite a bit of money into it, but I need to augment it and go around the outside. So it could be, well, let's put a new front end on because I want to empower my business to be able to change the front end at will, or actually I'm going to put something in terms of a checkout in place, you know, like a bulk commerce or something like that, because I want to augment my existing setup. I'm quite happy with most of it, maybe move away gradually. Next, greenfield. Well, so a good example of greenfield from an EPAM client would be Dawn Foods, where they went in and said, okay, let's put in commerce tools and Contentstack, and we'll build out a functionality or a capability from afresh. To be fair, that's not always that common, because you're going to plug into an ERP system or an existing IMS somewhere, but that's another approach you can take. Okay, I'm going to pick a brand that's not currently digital, or a product that's not currently digital, and I'm going to build it from scratch using Mac technologies and then migrate everything across to that. So we do have that in a lot of situations. You can also look at de-risking. So this is really when you're in a position where you have to maybe upgrade a massive piece of architecture, or it's going to fail and you're going to get into a lot of trouble maybe in 6 months to 12 months time, or there's something that really isn't working and it's really hurting your business. How can you de-risk that element so that you can move away from it carefully? And it's close to augmentation, but as I said, a lot of these things can be mixed up as you go along, and it's really a approach of, okay, we've got a real problem here we need to solve in the next 6 months. How can we quickly do that? And Mac is a really good approach for being able to do that, because you're not doing a lot of massive monolithic movovers. There are some risks to this approach. They're easily mitigated in a lot of cases, but they're things to think about before you approach sort of moving to Mac in this sense. So really it's looking at how you're delivering new capability, how you're delivering that digital product, making sure that you've got the capabilities in place or the thinking in place to be able to move to a Mac model, because it does take a different sort of thought process in how to do it, which fits really nicely with DevOps and CI/CD and all of these different approaches where you can you're delivering quickly. You're not going down the sort of the 1 month, 3 month release schedules. You're moving away from having upgrade paths. You're really moving away from sort of the code freeze setup, because everything's cloud native SaaS. It's thinking as a business about delivering things faster, therefore parallel streams, therefore product-led roadmaps and product owners and things like that. So if you don't get that right, and I've seen this quite a few times with clients, they've got the technology right, but they're not changing their business to make it happen. And that causes a lot of problems. You get a disconnect. The other one is complexity. To Kelly's point, it's not necessarily more complex in terms of what are you trying to do in terms of like putting it all together or working it as a business, but it's complex sometimes in terms of the vendor relationships. You're moving from managing one vendor to maybe 4 or 5. From an SI point of view or from an agency point of view, you're partnering up with 4 or 5 different vendors going into an opportunity, and it's just managing that through. So it's not a massive problem, but it's something to think about. Finally, it's aligning the business. So Mac really works well, going back to the how you're delivering, with a product owner type setup. And to do that, you need to work at getting away from the silos. You've got to think about having cross-functional teams delivering this. You've got to think about shared KPIs or OKRs, depending where you come from. But it's that sort of thinking. You really need to assess how you're going to get the business behind this new rapid way of delivering. Otherwise, there's going to be a disconnect in the way that it's working. So when you're building that business case, what does that look like? And why would you do it? Partly not calling this business case because it didn't fit in the circle, so we'll stick with why. But ultimately what you're going to have is happier colleagues and happier customers. Happier colleagues because they're getting to do what they want to do and they're getting to serve the customer in the way that they want to do it, and happier customers because they're getting what they need faster, better, and you're responding to their needs. So there's a lot of happy going on. You're going to end up with a business that's aligned with itself.
and you're going to end up with, I've seen so many times, both working client side and agency side, a business that's dysfunctional because everybody's going off in different directions and they're not sharing their goals and their approaches, and the IT's acting as a blocker to the commercial teams. It's really frustrating. If you get this right, you can move to a place where everyone's swimming in the same direction. It's so powerful. You know, you're going to increase your revenues. You're going to be able to respond quicker to opportunities. You're actually going to increase revenue because you're going to pick up those opportunities you couldn't respond to fast enough. So it's a gain. It's not necessarily organic growth. It's picking up stuff where you'd lost the opportunity to increase your revenue. Why am I going backwards? Hang on, let's keep going down. There you go. And you will reduce cost in the end, and you'll reduce cost not necessarily around things like license fees or anything like that, although you probably will, but ultimately because you're moving faster, because you're not doing upgrades, because you're not having expensive reconsiderations of your architecture every 2 to 3 years, you're saving all that cost that you'll be investing into it in terms of development, in terms of having to do those upgrade paths. You know, the classic sort of, we'll get the end of our 2 years, we're 3 versions behind and we've got to spend £2 million just to keep up with where the version is on our current vendor. Well, that goes out the window because you're not going to have any upgrade path. There's no versioning going on. And finally, the speed. And I think the speed feeds back into all of it, where there's no bottlenecks, where there is no blockers to a business being able to achieve what it wants to achieve. You're going to do stuff faster. You're going to get there faster. So that's basically a good 6 hours worth of workshops and conversations in one slide. There's a lot more to it than that. I've probably oversimplified it. But there you go.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to ask you a question, then open questions to Q&A. I will just take over the screen. So I think, Matt, my question is obviously, whilst you can do a greenfield development, as you talked about with Dawn Foods, most companies have invested significantly in their existing technologies and their existing infrastructure. As we heard from Kelly, you don't have to start by a big bang, switch everything overnight, or indeed maybe switch everything ever. I don't know. Can you just talk to that a little bit in terms of, you know, how do you get started and how do you deal with maybe we're invested elsewhere?
Yeah. So I think the important thing is to get a really clear picture of where you actually are. It's amazing how many companies don't know what they've got necessarily or how it all fits together. So that's really important. I think once you've got that and you can identify what's working for you and what isn't, then you can start thinking about how you keep the bits that are important because they're fine. They do the job. You know, if it works, you don't need to fix it. And then it's thinking about how could I improve upon that by augmentation. That's really an augmentation question. And it's the point at which that augmentation, maybe 12 months, 18 months down the line, allows you to move to maybe a chipping away and remove some of the other elements of the architecture. It's moving into a de-risk, I guess. It's giving you that flexibility later on, so that you don't have that question that a lot of companies get every 2 to 3 years of, okay, I need to upgrade something or change something out. You can evolve it.
Okay. And typically, are there any particular parts of the stack that you would look to start with, or does that just depend on the individual business circumstance?
It depends on the business circumstance. There's a lot of people that start out with the question, oh, we need an e-commerce platform. Okay, that's fine, but actually you can nail some of your actual problems with maybe a distributed order management or detaching your front end as a starter or looking at your content management system as well, and then thinking about what you're doing with some of the more core elements of that. So it really depends where the pain points are. Okay, thanks, Matt. And I think you touched on a few things there well, on one thing, which is MACH doesn't just equal commerce. MACH goes through a number of elements of the stack. Obviously, commerce, content management are probably two of the larger elements that you do think about, but there are, in terms of DAM, PIM, OMS, there are MACH crosses a huge variety of technologies in the platform. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Matt. I'm just going to go wider to Sonia and Kelly now. So Sonia, I asked you about the question about speed when we finished your segment. So really keen to know, are there shared characteristics of a business to be able to move at the pace that the 3 examples that you gave did?
Yeah, I think Matt spoke to a few of them already. The difference I see is how aligned a business is cross-functionally. Sometimes that really translates into pod and squad systems, whatever organizational model you take. The important thing is the trust in between an IT person and the marketing person, from practitioner level all the way up to C-level. And they all need to think about business outcomes and customer first. That's really, really important, because if you start having those old IT versus marketing battles, you won't get anything done. And as a shared characteristic, I often see that the respective leads actually have shared OKRs, that there is not a set of OKRs for marketing and a set for IT, but that the digital teams share them. And that sometimes helps to foster the trust and the collaboration that may not yet be a habit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so very much around trust, business outcomes, shared OKRs, so removing those silos that can exist in an organization. I think what's very, very clear from what you've all said today is that you can't have what were traditional silos if you are adopting MACH. That's just not going to work. Just also, Kelly touched on starting somewhere. And not starting necessarily too big. Sonia, I think you had maybe a use case of, what is a use case or an example of where someone's maybe gone and set up a microservice as a way to starting on a MACH journey?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the term microservices fits. Kelly is probably going to get an allergy. But I see two different ways for that. One is a core project that is strategic or urgent. So the example that came to mind when you asked the question was a large clothing retailer that needed to create a mobile app that business users were in control of, that they could change as Black Friday evolved to make sure that the campaigns that were there were actually still in stock, which was the problem they had the year before. The IT guy was not reachable and couldn't change the order in the native app, right? Seems really simple. Anyway, they employed a monolith, failed for 9 months, and then moved in a matter of 4 weeks, that entire project from start to crash, in MACH technology. After that, the entire rest of the business queued up behind that digital team and also wanted to move their respective areas. I've seen the same happen with a video gaming company that started to put the content, like the story quest editors, in control of changing the in-game content rather than having to deploy updates all the time. They could do that live. The organization hated that idea. The first game started doing it successfully. Half a year later, they were debating who could go next, right? So pick something that matters, that has sufficient strategic view that when you are successful, people actually care. But that is still sort of enough under the radar that you can use it to experiment.
Fabulous. Thanks, Sonia. And Kelly, I'm just going to bring you in there. If there's anything more that you wanted to say on that, because I know we brushed you off just as you were answering that last time.
No, I think what Sonia said is correct, which is demonstrate a quick win and people will line up behind it. It is better, demonstratably better. And I think you just have to start small and people will naturally follow ideas that are successful.
Great, thanks, Kelly. I have a couple more questions. I know we've got about another 5 minutes. I'd love to get some questions from the audience, if we can encourage you. I'm sure that there must be something that you'd love to know about MACH and your organization. So if you can, that would be great. But if not, I will keep going. You can keep listening to me talking to the panel. And obviously, panel, if there's anything more that you haven't said that you'd like to, please do.
I would like to say something, Matt.
Go on.
Surprisingly. Do you know, one common characteristic I forgot was people need to be brave. That we don't talk about that a lot, and it sounds so kind of wishy-washy, right? But you said before that business users are empowered then. That takes a lot of courage, because it was very convenient for us as marketing people to blame everything on IT a few years ago. Like, oh no, we can't do this because we need to get IT involved, and that's gone. So now it's on us marketing people. to create magic, right? That's scary a little, but
Thank you
awesome
for
too.
saying that, Sonia. I could not agree more with you that you do have to be brave sometimes.
Right?
And
So be brave.
It's actually related also to having the confidence in your own capabilities as a business, because you know your business better than a lot of other people, and waiting for, and this is going to sound terrible coming from an agency, but sometimes waiting for an agency to come in and tell you how to run your business is not the best idea. You know that, you just might need a little bit of help getting there, and it's that self-confidence. You know what you're doing, really.
Yeah.
Fabulous, thank you. Be brave, there we go. In terms of, Sonia, you touched on this at the beginning, around the stat that sort of digital could wait, and therefore I think it was 85% sort of said that's next year. Given that obviously COVID changed everything for every business in every sector, do you still think that there's a need to try and encourage executive teams to get on board with digital agendas? Have you seen a shift coming out, starting to come out the other side of COVID in terms of how all three of you are interacting with clients?
Interesting. The question, do we need to do more, better, faster with digital? Every board, every executive will now say, oh yes. What still has not really happened is an understanding for the different approach between a monolithic suite and the ability to really respond quickly to this changed world with a composable stack architecture. And much of that is because it's so new. And of course, if you are on the board or if you are in the executive team, it requires education, talking to peers to understand how did they approach this shift, how did they do it. So everybody understands digital first now. I think they would have been fired last year if they hadn't, but not everybody yet understands the potential of MACH. And that's why the Alliance is there, to share those peer stories and the success stories of those who have done it already.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Sonia. And of course, sort of starting to see MACH and a lot of the key vendors appear in the analyst reports and articles really does help. So we have Jerome Daniel, who is going to ask a question. So Gordon is going to facilitate that for us.
Hi, I hope you guys can hear me.
We've got you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Jerome. I think it's good. I got an overview of what is that we are trying to do here, with respect to this microservices, and then instead of tying to a bigger platform. But if companies have to get this started, what is this role of MACH Alliance? Who are we? Is it a group of consulting organization, or is it like a peer group which is trying to form this? Is it a consulting company, MACH Alliance?
Okay, I'm going to go to our chair of the MACH Alliance, our current chair, to take first pass at that. Kelly.
Yeah, so the MACH Alliance is a consortium of 31 vendors. We should be at about 40 here in the next month or so. But we're ISVs and SIs, so we have both consulting companies and product companies, and we're coming together to advocate for MACH-based principles. So we're primarily about education and helping the market understand what MACH is and why it is better. As part of it, we also do have a peer networking group as well. And it's called the Ambassador Program. So we have 20 different ambassadors, and those folks are from retailers and brands and others. And they're very focused on helping to educate the market and explain their stories. So we have a lot of case studies from these members, and there's good peer-to-peer networking. So if you're interested, we very much encourage you to apply to become an ambassador and follow us on social media.
Thanks, Kelly. So the Alliance is not it's not a consulting company. It is made up of, as Kelly said, vendors and SIs that do deliver services, but the purpose of the Alliance is to provide materials to businesses and to people interested in MACH to be able to be educated, to evangelize, and to really understand MACH technologies. So quite a big distinction between the individual people and actually what we come together to achieve in the market. Hopefully that clears that up for you. All right, I think we are at the top of the hour. Thank you very much to everybody for attending. Thank you for our panelists. A lot to take out from that, but certainly a great overview of MACH, the impact on CX, and really, I think, how to get an organization on a MACH journey. Some really nice advice about where to start, how big to start. But certainly the key message there is to start. So thank you very much all. Have a wonderful rest of Wednesday, and yeah, bye-bye.